One proud lesbian, let me tell you.
Gay Americans, hundreds of thousands gathered in Washington this weekend to press their fight for civil rights.
The rights of individual privacy, for the rights of sexual preference. We come together for rights of all American people.
Are they entitled to the same legal protection as other American minorities? Good evening, I'm Britt Hume, and this is Nightline.
We are discriminating against in jobs.
Our focus tonight, gays and equal rights, and how the AIDS crisis has complicated and intensified the battle.
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from Washington, Britt Hume.
25,000 deaths. That's the number now blamed on the AIDS epidemic, and experts expect hundreds of thousands more to die from it. It has hit the homosexual community in this country with special force, plunging it into a health crisis just as homosexuals were trying to win the fight to be treated, they say, just like everyone else. But if the AIDS calamity has made homosexuality even more of a stigma in the eyes of some, it has united gays and their families and other supporters as never before. That unity was expressed this weekend in the massive gay rights demonstration that occurred here in Washington. Karen Stone reports on that demonstration and what its participants hope it will achieve.
During the past several days, there have been demonstrations of joy and celebration in the nation's capital.
Look at each other. Look at yourselves. What you see is strength and courage. What you see is a statement in honesty and pride, self-love and acceptance.
There have also been demonstrations of anger and frustration.
On AIDS treatment, no more delay!
We're the last minority that it's still okay to dump on, and I'm tired of it.
We are demanding our civil rights. To hell with the Harvard decision. To hell with Burke. And to hell with the Reagan administration. To hell!
Dave Castro, Michael DeSantis, Alphonse De Laura.
And there were tears and time for mourning, as a quilt almost as big as 2 football fields was spread out on the mall between the Washington Monument and the Capitol, commemorating nearly 2,000 Americans who have died of AIDS.
Bill Hope. Kea Kodrea. Roger Reinhold.
It was possibly the most cleansing, the most purifying of many of the events for many people. They were for the first time, able to get in touch with their grief and let it go. Get in touch with their anger over the loss.
Capitol Police estimated the size of the crowd participating in Sunday's March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights at 200,000. March organizers put the number much higher, from 500 to 700,000. Whatever the total, it was the largest turnout in Washington in recent years for any cause, and by far the largest ever for gay rights. Many participants likened it to the Civil Rights March on Washington of 1963.
There's black people and white people, straight people, all kinds of people that are getting together just for civil rights in general.
A lot of parents came from all over the country to Washington this weekend. I think there must have been 200, 250 parents
From all groups.
California, Louisiana, Minnesota, all over the country
Boston.
to come and show their support for their children.
Richard and Amy Ashworth, whose eldest son died of AIDS in May, feel strongly more needs to be done to fight the disease.
It took the death of Rock Hudson to get Washington to talk about it. We wasted so many years.
In July of this year, President Reagan met AIDS victims for the first time and named a controversial 13-member National Commission on AIDS. 2 of those commission members recently resigned.
We waited for 4 years for any kind of major funding to be brought from this administration. It took almost 6 years for President Reagan to speak the word AIDS. That's unbelievable. It is unforgivable, and we will not forget.
Pat Norman, one of the organizers of the march, says the demonstrators have a number of demands, including a massive increase in funding for AIDS research and education, end of discrimination against persons with AIDS, repeal of sodomy laws across the country, passage of a federal civil rights amendment for gay men and lesbians that would end discrimination in housing and employment, a presidential order banning discrimination against homosexuals in the military and federal government. Tomorrow, the focus will be here at the Supreme Court, where thousands are expected to protest the High Court's decision last year upholding a Georgia sodomy law. Hundreds of the demonstrators, some of whom have AIDS, then plan to carry their protest up the court steps, where they expect to be arrested.
The message we hope to send to the Supreme Court is that we want our constitutional rights, and we will not cooperate with the Supreme Court injustice at denying us our civil rights and constitutional rights.
Last June, during an AIDS demonstration in front of the White House, District of Columbia police were criticized by some for the way in which the protesters, some of whom had AIDS, were handled with yellow latex gloves.
We expect them to perform better tomorrow than they did at the White House in June. However, we have no way of knowing what they're going to do.
When Nightline called District of Columbia police, they refused to comment on how they plan to handle tomorrow's demonstration at the Supreme Court. Whatever happens tomorrow, organizers say the events of the last several days have brought together a new coalition that includes not only gay men and women, but political leaders, women's groups, and organized labor. With violence against gays reportedly doubling in the last year, and with the potential for that backlash to intensify, the new resolve and activism of gay men and women are sure to be tested. This is Karen Stone for Nightline in Washington.
When we come back, we'll talk with two lawyers with opposing views on the issue of gays and the law. Tom Stoddard, who heads an organization promoting gay rights, and Roger Magnuson, who's against any special legal protection for gays. Who's with us now in our New York studios, teaches law at New York University and heads the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, a nationwide organization dedicated to promoting the legal rights of gay people. Roger Magnuson, who joins us from our affiliate KSTP in Minneapolis, is a private attorney and author of the book Are Gay Rights Right?, which argues that any special legal protection for homosexuals would be wrong. Mr. Stoddard, this weekend we heard a lot about the size of this demonstration, and it was indeed as large and in many ways resembled the civil rights marches of the 1960s. But I wonder, to the average American out there who finds homosexual conduct inexplicable, if he can be expected to equate the two, civil rights, Martin Luther King, those great demonstrations and that great cause, with the battle that gays are now fighting. What do you say to that individual?
I would say this. The gay rights movement is really no different from the black civil rights movement, from the women's movement. It is an attempt to bring a hitherto unrecognized minority of Americans into the broad stream of American life in recognition of the fundamental American notions of equality and tolerance and diversity. We don't seek special protection. We don't seek a leg up that no one else has. We seek justice. We seek tolerance. We seek fair treatment. In this country, gay people have not had that up until now. In fact, until 20 years ago, you didn't hear the word gay, and programs like Nightline, if they existed then, would never have talked about the gay rights movement because it barely existed. Gay people lived in shame. They lived in a closet that was so dark that they, in many cases, didn't even recognize their own true natures. That time is over. That time is over for good, and it is time for all Americans to come forward and recognize the need for diversity and tolerance.
That's eloquently stated, but I wonder if it really addresses the concern of a person who finds homosexual conduct unimaginable and who now sees that homosexual behavior is capable of spreading a deadly disease and wonders if there really is an equation here. What do you say to that individual?
Well, first of all, AIDS is not a gay illness. AIDS is something that can be transmitted by any person to another person through particular kinds of behavior, which can be engaged in by people who are not homosexual as well as heterosexual. But I would say this. It is very important that we as a society not exclude people, that we permit people to develop in the way that they would choose right. In our society, we have recognized religious tolerance for a long period of time. We've recognized that people have the right to choose their own path, and this is no different from that question.
Mr. Magnuson, That's all. That's well put, isn't it? I mean, he's simply saying that they want to be treated like everyone else and that they are really not asking for any special protections. Do you accept that?
Well, not at all, Britt. I think the first thing we have to recognize is that homosexuals have all the same rights all other Americans do. And what they're really seeking is additional protections not available to other Americans. For example, if I decide to go to Rose Hanlon's rooming house and I want to rent a room from her for $15 a week because I'm going to the law school in Cambridge, Mass., and she says, Mr. Magnuson, do you like J.S. Bach? And I say, well, I have to admit I have a strong affectional preference for the music of J.S. Bach. And she slams the door on my face. What rights do I have? The rights I have is to go to the next listing on my classified ad directory. There is no particular right Americans have to protect their preferences, whether it be for peanut butter or for having children or for rooting for the Minnesota Twins in the World Series. Homosexuals have all the same rights, as been shown by this demonstration, other Americans do. And it's very peculiar, especially in this day and age, as Britt, I think your last question to Mr. Stoddard implied, that the homosexual rights movement is trying to equate this status or this behavior with being black or being female. We must remember that this behavior, that is to say the behavior that unites homosexuals, which is essentially anal or oral sodomy, is illegal in a great number of states. It's a criminal behavior. And indeed, the Supreme Court of the United States has, within the last year, suggested it's perfectly appropriate from a constitutional point of view to criminalize homosexual behavior among consenting adults. It's a very unhealthy lifestyle. Some of the facts that have emerged from the AIDS controversy reveal that the average homosexual has over 500 different male sexual contacts in his life. The average AIDS patient has been shown to have over 1,000 different male sexual contacts.
But I have
in
a
his
chance
life.
to jump in here, and there's a lot of data or alleged data that he is throwing out, much of which is patently false. This sounds very much like Lester Maddox talking about rooming houses in his restaurants in 1960 in Georgia. The truth is that a person can be denied housing, can be denied a job, can be denied basic civil rights in most parts of the United States now because of a perception of sexual orientation. Mrs. Smith, if she runs a rooming house, can say to someone, I don't like the way you look. You don't look masculine enough for me. Or to a woman, you don't look feminine enough for me, and I'm not going to let you stay here. And every other person in that town can say the same thing, and that person can lose the right to live. Well, that's exactly what Lester Maddox used to say about blacks in 1960, and we rejected that because it's not fair. People have the right in this country to the basic necessities of life. They have a right to follow their own identity, to make their own choices. It may not be Mr. Magnuson's way of life. It may not be his choice. I don't particularly agree with or identify with his way of life, but that doesn't mean he has the right to make choices for other people.
Mr. Stoddard, the point is being black is not criminal.
Being gay is not criminal either, Mr. Magnuson, and you should be aware of that as a lawyer.
No, being gay is not being criminal.
Hold it, both of you. You both can't talk at once. Mr. Magnuson, please go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Stoddard, committing an act of sodomy in the state of Minnesota is criminal, and it's perfectly appropriate for it's perfectly appropriate for the Supreme Court to say it is. Being black is not the most dangerous activity in America today. Committing sodomy is the most dangerous single form of activity a person can commit. Why in the world do we want to...
Gentlemen, please, we'll give you both a chance to respond on all these points and more when we continue our discussion in a moment. Once again, Tom Stoddard and Roger Magnuson. Mr. Stoddard, I want to explore this question of legal rights for gays with you for a moment. How far does it go? I gather that what's sought here is an attempt to have people recognize, the courts and the Congress and other legal bodies recognize, that homosexuality is really an alternative lifestyle and a valid one, and one that should not be a stigma. Now, how far would that go? You want equal treatment in housing and in employment and so on. What about in family activities? How far would you go there?
Well, let me go back a minute. Over the past 30 years, this country has built up a body of law that protects people in the basic necessities of life, in housing, in employment, in public accommodations, that is, public services, and recognizes that people have a right to do those things, to have those things, regardless of race and gender and regardless of their religion. We would like to expand that so that it would cover sexual orientation. One state, Wisconsin, has already done that. So have many large cities, actually most large cities in the United States. You know, this reminds me of Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King, when he was once asked the need for civil rights legislation, said, "You don't have to love me, but you do have to respect my rights." And that's all that gay men and women are asking for, the right to be treated in a fair way in the courts and also in their family lives. In no part of the United States can two men or two women obtain a marriage license. And in many cases, a man or a woman who is a parent will lose that child simply because of homosexuality, which may have nothing to do with that aptness of the parent to be a good parent.
Let me ask you if you would extend that marriage license. How about adoption?
Absolutely. Adoption exists. There are gay parents throughout the United States, both natural parents and adoptive parents. And parenting has nothing to do with sexual orientation. It has to do with whether you care for a child well, whether you're a good parent. It has nothing to do, again and again, there are more than 25 studies that document this. And gay people recognize that. They simply want the recognition from society.
Mr. Magnuson, is it realistic or appropriate to expect that the law anytime soon will recognize gay couples in the same way that it recognizes heterosexual couples? And should it?
No, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, it really makes no sense to have gay rights, because gay rights would just be a door opener to other forms of rights. But where are you going to stop when it comes to deviant sexual behavior? What about rights for people who commit incest? Are we going to develop a sophisticated name for intragenerational, interfamilial sexual preference and extend some kind of rights to that, or adulterers' rights, or bestiality rights? Of course not. It just doesn't make any sense to take various forms of deviant sexual behavior and treat them as though they're similar to status groups like being black or being a woman. If we're going back to Martin Luther King, let's remember what Martin Luther King said was the essence of civil rights. Martin Luther King said the essence of civil rights was a dream that he had, a dream that in the future people would not be judged on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. And in important relations of life, whether adoption or family life or other forms of important human association, we have to let people judge others based on their perception of character.
That's exactly what gay people seek too. They seek to be judged.
I don't understand why, excuse me, Mr. Magnuson, I don't understand why that in any way is an argument against the extension of gay rights in the way that Mr. Stoddard has outlined.
Well, let's take an example. When we had a gay rights ordinance in St. Paul, there was a local father named Father Buchanan. Father Buchanan interviewed a person for a job teaching 8th grade boys choir. He inquired of this gentleman's past and found that he was a homosexual and had difficulty in his past school situations with being a homosexual. He decided not to hire him because, as a Roman Catholic priest, he had a good faith conviction based on the Bible, based on his church's traditions, that homosexuality was wrong, and that, in fact, this could cause trouble in his own school. Because of the gay rights ordinance, Father Buchanan's case was referred to the city attorney's office for criminal prosecution.
May I respond to that?
And if, excuse me, if
Mr.
in fact,
Stoddard, please, in a moment.
Let me finish, Mr. Stoddard, with all due respect. As a matter of fact, it was referred to the St. Paul City's attorney's office for criminal prosecution. He was facing potential of 90 days in jail and a $300 fine at the time when a St. Paul referendum repealed the gay rights ordinance. It makes sense to allow people, good faith people of genuine conviction, to take into account the fact that a person may be captive of perverted sexual behavior.
Mr. Stoddard, I'm going to give you a chance to answer that, but first we have to take a brief break. With Tom Stoddard and Roger Magnuson. Mr. Stoddard, before we took that last break, Mr. Magnuson seemed to be suggesting that consideration of homosexuality was valid and it was relevant in some instances to the person's character and might even be consistent with the free exercise of religion. You wanted to respond? Please do.
I did indeed. Mr. Magnuson seems to be unable to stay on the point. He talks about incest, and then he talks about adultery, and then he talks about the Catholic Church. In fact, as Mr. Magnuson should well know as a lawyer, there is a First Amendment. And if the Catholic Church wishes to discriminate on the basis of gender or sexual orientation or race, it can do that. The instance that he raised in St. Paul should not have been decided in the way it was. It wouldn't have been raised in the way it was in my own city of New York. So he is raising a false issue. Churches have the right to discriminate, and no civil rights ordinance can override that. Gay people are simply seeking the right to be treated as individuals in the ordinary public forums, in public jobs, and in the ways you and I are treated in most circumstances.
All right, Mr. Stoddard, I want to give you a chance to talk about one last subject, and that is the effect of the AIDS epidemic on the struggle for gay rights. Has it been deleterious in the long run, or has it, because of the sympathy that it has awakened in people, and because of the unity that is provided, actually been a force in favor of your cause?
Well, it's been both. Of course, it has caused widespread suffering and death, and that is terrible in and of itself. It has also given new reason for hatred and for bigotry against gay people, as Mr. Magnuson, unfortunately, himself just demonstrated. However, it has also brought together the gay men and women of the society. It has raised their issues to a new level of public consciousness. It has caused America to finally recognize the full scope and the full interests of gay men and women.
All right, thank you. Mr. Magnuson, why will we not look back in 20 years and say, do you know, 20 years ago, we used to look upon gays as somehow different, people to be discriminated against, and my, we've come a long way from that time, and isn't it a good thing?
Well, I don't think we'll look at it that way at all. I think the real essence of the dispute here is what is true compassion for the homosexual? What is genuinely in the homosexual's best interest? The point is that the homosexual is being destroyed by inches and yards by his own behavior. 20 or 30 years ago, we might have said that a drunken was incurable, an alcoholic was incurable. We've learned that's not true. It's not compassionate to give an alcoholic a bottle. It's not compassionate to tell a homosexual he's normal when he's not. As a matter of fact, the evidence that's emerged from the AIDS crisis in America reveals that the homosexual lifestyle is an unhealthy behavior, and it's destroying the homosexual himself. And the truly compassionate person will not be an enabler of this unhealthy conduct, but will try to call the homosexual to his true dignity as a human being.
All right, I have to make that the last word. We're out of time. I want to thank you both, Tom Stoddard in New York, Roger Magnuson in Minneapolis. Thank you very much indeed. One final program note. This Wednesday, ABC News will present the second in a series of 3 historic broadcasts to be seen live in the U.S. and the Soviet Union simultaneously. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
You believe this? I have to go.